So what is it that differentiates science from non-science?
Hi. Um, I don't know. First of all, let me just say I really enjoy this conversation. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. In my book, I think people's most favorite part is chapter 3, where we talk about the ship of Theseus. But personally, I think the chapter 8, which is about philosophy of science, I think that's my personal favorite. It's got a lot of ideas. What separates science from non-science? So there's a lot of different potential answers, and one of them we might talk about later on. Maybe Popper. Popper has something called falsifiability. That science depends on making things that are falsifiable. I like to say that science is part of reason, and non-science is not part of reason. Okay, so there are very interesting parts of non-reason, like poetry and art and music and human interactions and reading novels are all, very interesting and exciting. But science is something that's based on reason. Now you can ask another question: what's reason and what's not reason? Okay, and that's a little bit even harder to say. But I can give you some properties that reason has. It's somehow objective, okay, in the sense that I can convince you that it's true, or I can convince you that it's false. Um, so, but in general, it's a hard question to ask. What makes something science and what makes something not science?
So let's take the example of history. Would you classify history as science or as non-science?
It depends. Okay, there's lots of different types of history. So if you're listing off facts, then I would consider it science. If you're interpreting the facts, then I would say it's not science, because there's different ways that one can interpret different things in history. The problem is not the problem, but the issue is that all of history consists of facts and then analyzing the facts and making finding patterns in the facts. So it's a mix both of being about what happened and being about our understanding of what happened. So it's not so simple. Um, every good historian has to A, give the facts, and also B, interpret those facts very well. Otherwise, they're just they're not really listing off the things. So both. History is both a part of science and it's not part of science.
Actually, I took the specific example of history because in history, one of the criterion by which we can demarcate science from non-science, prediction, can never be taken, can never be given. So it is very important that if you make, say, a theory of physics, it will certainly predict events in the future. But history, by definition, would not try to do it.
I'm not sure about that. We study history partially to figure out, what is human nature and how the future will be. Well, there's a saying somewhere, those who do not study history are cursed to live through its mistakes again. So,
So those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
right. Sorry. So good. So what that's doing is it's saying that when you learn history, it's making predictions about the future. We're learning about say politics or human nature or things like that. Um, I read a lot about the 1930s and Stalin and Russia. That's a favorite area of mine, and I'm always worried about that happening again and stuff like that. So history doesn't essentially make predictions about the future. Neither does science, by the way. Science makes predictions about what will happen now if we do this experiment. It doesn't say what type of scientific developments will come in the future. Nobody can really predict that. Um, but science, history does say something about the future. It does say something that we can learn about the future. So I think, I don't know, I'm not sure that demarcation, that history is about the past and science is about the future, is different. But I will say something um, about the nature of science. Science and technology, which is not the same thing. Technology is about making things better, or engineering, whereas science is more about understanding. But both of them build on the past. In other words, if I wanted to make a, a great cell phone, I would have to look at the previous cell phones and then make it better in some sense. Um, Not history, but art and literature and aesthetics. All those things don't necessarily build on the past. In fact, in some sense, they break away from the past. In other words, if you have a new school of painting, what it does is it says, no, we're not going to do this anymore, and we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do this. So, in that sense, that's an interesting way of demarcating, separating science and non-science. Science and technology, they they build on the past and they go further. Okay, so I can say that the trains we have today are the best trains in the history of the world because we looked at previous trains and we got better. The cell phones that we have are the best cell phones that we have in the history of the world. The refrigerators that we use are the best refrigerators. You wouldn't buy a 10-year-old refrigerator because it's old-fashioned. As opposed to that, it's not clear who the greatest literary artists are. You know, who wrote the greatest novels, or who um, who who is the world's greatest painter, because that is not based on now. That's, you know, it could, you could say that Shakespeare was the greatest writer of all time, and he lived 500 years ago, or Dante, or something like that. Um, so, you know, science builds on itself, and in some sense, literature, art, and painting, and drawing, and poetry is timeless. It's based on things that are, you know, they don't change over time. Open the Bible and look at the book of Genesis. It's there's a lot of sibling rivalry there. So it's talking about things that don't change. You know, read Shakespeare and the fighting between a son and his father. That's things that don't change over time. They're timeless. So that's the difference in between those two things, between science and, let's say, the arts. Science looks at its past and goes beyond it, and literature and the arts look at timeless things that, you know, they don't necessarily, things that don't change. The sibling rivalry of the book of Genesis is no less than it is now, and stuff like that. And
Sir, you
the beauty of certain paintings is as beautiful and as haunting as when they were made, you know, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. Go.
You mentioned sibling rivalry. I read some scholars believe that psychology has as its subject human beings, human emotions, feelings. These things are eternal. They are same for all ages. So that is why you can read many great things about them in the older scriptures. But you can't read physics from Aristotle, but you can read. I mean, you can read about human psychology from all the ancient scriptures of the world.
Right, right, right. So physics books that 20 years old is useless in some sense, but psychology, yeah. Although psychology is getting more and more scientific, right? I mean, as we get more and more knowledge of the thing, but human nature, right? You can read David Hume on human nature is um, just as helpful as reading somebody today. I mean, very, it's very interesting.
Yes, I read about friendship in David Hume. I mean, the remarks about that he makes about friendships are absolutely apt. I mean, as far as I can see. Okay,
Right.
but we are derailing from the topic at hand. Okay, so sir, there are two things that are pillars of demarcating science from non-science. One is the one is prediction, and the second is explanation. How much do you think explanation is important in a scientific theory or a physical scientific theory, and how much is explanation the basis of a scientific theory?
I think it's all explanation and not calculation. Okay. In other words, it's all about understanding. Science is about understanding, not calculations, not not engineering, not finding a better cell phone, but understanding how. I mean, making a better cell phone is a very good thing, and I appreciate it. I buy the new cell phones as much as I can, but the purpose of science is understanding. And I have a little story in my book. There are some laws of physics which are use what's called differential equations, and there are particles of nature that follow these differential equations, but human beings can't solve these differential equations. So there are dust particles that are following equations of motions that human beings can't figure out where they will be. Okay, it's too chaotic for human beings to figure out, and yet somehow the particles of nature, they know where to go. In other words, they that dust particle has more intelligence than we do, and he knows where to go. He's going to follow those laws of those differential equations. It's some sense. Anyways, so I once said this to my professor, and he said to me, he said, yes, but the particle of nature, the dust particle, doesn't know why he's moving there. He says, human beings, the purpose of science is to figure out why, not to, or what, or to understand. Our goal is to understand, not necessarily to calculate. Particles of nature calculate where to go, but we have understanding, or science is about gaining understanding, and so that's the central feature of science.
So you're trying to say the dust particles in Brownian motion know where to go, but they don't understand it. On the other hand, human beings can't calculate those things, but they understand it that it is happening due to this.
Right, right. I don't want to use the word that the particles of nature know where to go, but they go
Okay.
where they're told to. Knowing means something about the mind. Particles of nature, as far as I know, don't have a mind, but they follow the rules, and
Okay.
but we understand the rules to an extent, not totally. We just can't predict the outcomes of the rules, but we understand the rules in some sense.
There are three methods used in science: deduction, induction, and abduction. Can you explain the three, and then we can go?
I can explain it. I can explain the first two. I've never heard the phrase abduction. What's abduction?
Sir, inference to the best explanation.
Okay, let's just talk about induction and deduction. Deduction is the simplest. If I give you a rule, okay, and I tell you all swans are white, swan is a type of bird, and all swans are white, then any swan that you will ever find will be white. So you will know that that all. So again, if you accept a rule, a general rule, then deduction means applying it to a particular. So if I tell you all men are mortals, in other words, all men will die, and you meet a man, you know that he will die. Okay, that's somewhat simple. Okay, in contrast, is induction. Induction is where we take many particulars, okay, and we go up and we make a general rule out of them. Okay, so if we meet many swans and we see that they're all white, okay, then inductively you can go on and you can say, oh, you know what? All swans are white. Okay. Now, that's a little bit more problematic because how can you make a general rule about something that you've seen? Only you've seen just a few of them. You haven't seen all swans in the history of the world. Let's just talk a little bit about physics. Um, Newton made a rule about how particles interact. In other words, if you have two particles, how they will be attracted to each other, and he gave a rule about it. He didn't look at all particles in all times. What he did was he looked at what he knew and he understood why certain things were attracted to each other. Okay, and then he generalized it and made a rule for all of them. Okay, so he that's called induction. You look at many particulars and you build up a general rule for all particulars. Okay, and the problem with that is it might not be true, and in fact, for Newton, it wasn't true. Okay, he said it's true for all bodies, but then 300 years later came quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics said for very small particles it's not true. Newton's laws don't work for very small particles. Okay, um, the laws of quantum mechanics work for very small particles, not the classical laws of Newton. So, in that sense, Newton was wrong. He generalized too much. It's fine. He generalized perfectly. He did not have access to some subatomic particles. It took us 300 years to get to such counterexamples to his general rules. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, but he was essentially wrong. I'm not saying Newton was wrong. Whatever, he's the greatest physicist of all time. I'm just saying this is a problem of induction, going up from the particulars to the general. Another example that Newton was wrong was relativity theory. So, you know, for the most part, it's true. But if you get to things like black holes or stuff like that, um, Newton's laws probably don't work in a black hole or near a black hole. So you have to be careful about that. I don't know, but I assume Newton's laws would say that something can go at any speed whatsoever, and comes along relativity theory and says, no, you can't go faster than the speed of light. So those are interesting things that Newton's laws did not predict. So so that's going up from the particular to the general. So whenever you do that, it's problematic because you don't have access to the general. You don't know what always is true, but the scientific method works. We see a lot of generalizations, and if you understand the phenomenon that you're looking at, not just see the phenomenon, not just look at all the little particulars, but understand why it's doing it, then maybe you can make this general rule of how it works. So that's what induction's all about. As for abduction, I can't talk about that. But
So, sir, does that mean that if Newton could be wrong, that whenever we make a generalization from a limited number of observations, we should always generalize with a pinch of salt?
not with a pinch of salt, but with trepidatude, fear and trepidatude. In other words, what I'm saying seems to be right, and it is right, whatever, but it's right in the cases that I've been thinking about or the cases that I've been working with. Um, but um, every scientist has to have some humility. Every scientist does have humility. In other words, what they're saying seems to be right, and it should continue to be right, but realize that it could be subject to change.
Can we go into Hume's problem of induction a little bit deeper?
Okay. Hold on. Second. So let's go a little bit deeper into Hume's things. Let's forget about science for a second. I turn on the light in my room. I turn the switch in my room on, and somehow the light goes on. Okay, and it's happened every single time I've done it. And I turn on the water in my shower, and always water comes out, not mud. That's a good thing. Okay. Now, can I take it that that will always happen? Okay. Another example: I wake up in the morning and the sun rises. Okay. Can I take it that that will always happen? So the answer is yes, you should, and you do live your life like that. Okay, you do live your life like that, but there's no logical reason why it should. Okay, that's what David Hume said. He said there's no logical reason why what happened in the past should continue to happen in the future. Okay. Now, you might go into it a little bit deeper and say, look, it's not only in my life experience that it happens, but when I'm flipping the switch on when I'm turning on the light switch, what I'm doing is I'm making a connection which allows electricity to go through, and electricity goes into the light bulb, and whenever electricity goes into the light bulb, that happens. So what I'm doing there is I'm linking up, I'm just saying it's not only my experience, it's everyone else's experience too. Anybody who has ever dealt with electricity knows that this is what happens. Everyone that ever does this knows that this happens, and it goes on. So what you're saying is it's not just my experience, it's all of humanity's experience, or it's all of our understanding. So the more we understand about the phenomenon, the more the more we're justified in accepting our induction principles. Okay. But it's not really true. I mean, obviously, again, science works on the principle of induction, and we should keep it. But there's no logical reason why it should continue. Okay, I'll justify that in a second. I'll qualify that in a second. There's no real reason. Now you might say, look, induction works. It always works. So we should continue doing induction. And you thought of that also. But the answer is that what you're saying is, oh, induction always worked, therefore we should keep induction. But what I'm saying is, just because something always works doesn't mean we should keep it. Okay, it doesn't mean it's always true. Okay, now let me just say where Hume was wrong, because I don't know the mechanism, but there is structure in the universe, and there are things there are laws in the universe, and they are keeping track. And more to the point is, and this is getting into something called the anthropic principle, life would not be possible in the universe if there weren't laws of physics, if there weren't regularities, things that happen over and over and over. So we developed from amoeba to human beings, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if there wasn't some principle of regularity, things going normal, and things following repeated patterns. Okay, so we do have repeated patterns, and somehow I'll say it's a law of physics that there is a law of physics, but that's again repeated. But in that sense, it is logical. In other words, if we did not, very fact that we exist, the very fact that living creatures exist, the very fact that intelligent creatures exist, shows that there are regularities in the laws of nature. Okay, and there are repeated things like that. Okay, I always have a cute time. When you shut the refrigerator, the light in the refrigerator goes off. Okay, and I play with my kids and I say to them, "How do you know the light goes off?" And they say, "Well, you can see when you close the door, the button gets closed, and you can press the button, and the light goes on and the light goes off." And I say, "Yeah, but maybe it doesn't work when you close the refrigerator door." And you get into some very deep philosophical conversations with a 10-year-old over that. And I tell them that maybe the light doesn't go off, but it's cute. Anyways, but again, we live our life as if induction works, and that's good. But it has that idea at the center of science, that induction works, is true, but it's hard to justify it.
So first of all, I must say the philosophical conversations with 10-year-olds or their age are of another level. They are actually
The philosophical conversations with who?
with 10-year-olds are of another level.
Oh no, they're the best. They're the best.
Yes.
When I drive my car with my kids in the car, they always want to go faster. They don't want to be stuck in traffic, and I tell them that the car that I drive can fly, but they have to close their eyes, and they can't see it fly. Only I can see it flying, and so they close their eyes, but then they say, "Oh, they open their eyes a little bit and they say, you see, we're not flying, And I say to them, no, it only works when your eyes are absolutely positively closed. And they get violently angry about this, and they try to close their eyes, and they say, well, we'll feel it. And I say, no, you can't know that the car is flying, and then the car will fly. Only if you don't know that. Anyways, we have many conversations about this, and they love it.
Can't you connect this to the interference experiment in quantum mechanics, that whenever you see it, it follows a classical trajectory, and whenever you don't see it, it follows the interference pattern?
All the time. I mean, I don't talk about quantum with them, but all the time. And we talk about whether or not, if a tree falls in the forest, if it makes noise or not. And we argue about it, and we discuss it, and I tell them it doesn't. and they say it does, and we discuss it, and we talk about how they can't know that it does. And they say, well, we'll set up a recording machine. And I'll say, no, that's not legitimate, whatever. But right, arguments with 10-year-olds, and these are things that are just plain fun, enjoyable.
Okay. Sir, now let me play devil's advocates on part of David Hume. You're saying that in our part of the universe that we see, in that there is something called the anthropic principle, and it states that if the laws of universe were not uniform, then these complex creatures, would not have existed.
Right.
But but that doesn't prove that induction is logically watertight, because for what logically watertight, it could not have been otherwise. But we can imagine situations in which the laws of physics could have been otherwise. It's again an observation of ours that the law, that because we exist, it is also an inductive leap, that the laws of universe had to be like this for us to exist.
Right. Right. So what you're saying is the anthropic principle is not logical necessity, and I agree. I'll even say worse. It doesn't mean it's not true. I'll say worse. It's an extremely unsatisfying explanation. Okay, And again, I give this example. It's not my example. It's from someone else in the book. The book is this. I give this example. Let's say a man is punished by death. He's punished. He's court and he did a crime, and he's punished by death. And they're gonna shoot him by firing squad. Okay, and he has a blindfold on, and there are 10 people there, and the captain of the army says, "Ready, aim, fire." Okay, and he somehow survives the firing squad. Okay, and so his eyes are still closed, and he says, "What happened? Why did I survive?" And they say, "Well, if you didn't survive, you couldn't ask this question." Okay, the very fact that you survived means you can ask this question. Now, that's a true statement. Okay, if he was shot and he was killed, he would not ask that question. But it doesn't answer the question. He wants to know, there were 10 people aiming rifles at him. He'd like to know why he survived. Did they miss? Were they shooting blanks? Et cetera, et cetera. And he does not know that answer. Yes, had he been shot, he couldn't have asked the question. He could not have asked the question. Okay, but why does it happen? Same thing here. If there were no regularities in the laws of physics, human beings could not live, or any animals could not live. Okay, and that's true. But question: why are there regularities in the universe? Why is it happening? Okay, and so the anthropic principle is an answer. It's a truthful answer. It's absolutely true. If there were no regularities, we wouldn't survive. But it's an unsatisfying answer. It doesn't make us happier. It doesn't give us the answer to the questions.
You mentioned firing squads. As an aside, just they used to, and you said, na, you read about history and how we could again turn against each other. So in firing, they used to use firing squads to fire at captives, so that no one person of the firing squads would think that he is the person responsible for killing them.
Right.
Everybody would think.
Right.
Okay.
No. So as far as I know, I thought it was that one of them has a blank in them. Right. The guns have a blank. They're not
Yeah,
really fun.
yeah,
They,
but that's
they
the, but they
they do
don't
it
tell
now.
them, na?
They do it nowadays also with when they kill people using poison. They strap them in, and they have 3 people, putting poison in them, and one of those people, or maybe 2 of those people, 2 out of 3 people, whatever, they don't. They're just putting in salt water, and that way each person can feel good about themselves that they're not really doing the killing.
Exactly. Now, sir, can we discuss Hampel's paradox?
No, sometimes I don't like to discuss those things. That's with the Raven. That's a little technical. That's going to turn people off. So let's not talk about it. Let's move on to the next one, because that's about induction, and it's very complicated. It's very interesting, but it's a little bit technical. But
Yes.
let me just give you the results of it. All ravens are black.
Yeah. Okay. So can we come to the beauty, elegance, and simplicity and the complexity of mathematics and its use in science?
Okay, so there are a lot of people who do science, and they say when they're given a choice of 2 theories, or they're given a choice of 2 formulas to describe certain phenomena, they take the beautiful one. Okay, now no one defines what it means to be beautiful, okay, when they say that. But very big physicists did say that, and they use it, like Paul Dirac. Paul Dirac is a Nobel Prize winning superhero beyond any compare. Nobody can compare. But but he says that he always chooses the more prettier thing to do. Um, so this has a few problems. One is it's hard to define what beauty is, especially what beauty in mathematics is. Two is, in what sense is beauty objective? Okay, we know that beauty in looking at beauty of people and beauty of things is, people have different opinions about that. Number three is, to what extent is beauty something that we learn? In other words, your mother tells you, oh, this is beautiful as a child, and you pick it up as it's beautiful. So your mother tells you that this and this, you know, scientific theory is nice. To what extent is it learned, and to what extent is it something objective? You'd like to think that your scientific theories are somehow objective, and one scientific theory is better than another scientific theory if it's more objective. So these are the type of the issues that you have. And another thing is, especially about beauty, is it's not always true. Okay, what people think is beautiful turns out to be that theory might not always be the true theory. Okay, so that's one thing. And there's a line, I think it's attributed to Einstein, but I've heard it attributed to other people. Another word for beauty is the word elegance. Okay, somehow this theory is more elegant and it explains things in a clearer, more general fashion. Okay, one of the problems with that. Oh, so one of the things they say from Einstein is that leave elegance for your tailor. In other words, your tailor knows when your suit is somehow elegant. Let him figure that out. So beauty and elegance are somehow not really, um, they're too hazy, they're too ethereal, not real, that people should take them seriously. Okay, but there's other types of criteria that scientists use to judge their theories. Another one is something called simplicity. Okay, and this goes back to Occam's razor. Okay, and the idea is, there are certain things that are more simple than others. There are certain theories that are more simple than others, and it usually you use the simpler theory. So let me give you the classical example of where it worked. Okay, the classical example of where simplicity worked is whether or not the Earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the Earth. Okay, now if you go outside, not you because it's dark by you, but by me it's still morning. If you go outside and you lie in the field, you will see the sun moving around the earth. You can actually see the sun moving around the earth. Okay, and you don't feel the earth moving at all. Okay, so
Correct.
okay, but Copernicus in the 1500s said it's not true. He said the earth goes around the sun. It just looks like the sun goes around the earth, but the earth really goes around the sun. And his reason for believing this is that the model of the universe, of the solar system, with a bunch of planets going around the sun, is simpler than the model of the universe where the earth is the center and the planets and the sun is going around them. Okay? And the reason for that is because if you take it that the earth is the center, then when you look at the planets, you see them making strange motions. Okay? And and it doesn't make sense that the universe should be that the planet should be making such strange motions. So if you accept the fact that the sun is the center, okay, let me state it a little bit clearly. If you disregard the fact that your vision, you empirically see the sun moving, and you empirically do not feel the earth moving, okay, if you disregard that fact, then the universe is somehow simpler if you say that the sun is in the center rather than the earth is in the center. Okay? Okay, let me give you another example. We were talking about subatomic particles. Okay, so there's traveling around in ways that Brownian motion. Okay, there's two ways of thinking about this. You could say that the particles have a mind and they're doing calculations, or you just say they don't have a mind and they're just following these laws. Okay, it's much simpler to say that they don't have a mind. That's another example of simplicity. And let me just give you one other example. There's no way to disprove that you're not a brain in a vat. Okay, in other words, that you're not just some brain hooked up to some computers, and all the external stimuli that you're feeling are just wires connected to your brains, and they're telling you to look at this picture of Noson Yanofsky talking, etc., etc. Okay, there's no way to disprove it. It could very well be true. However, it's simpler to say that that's not true. Okay, that the Matrix, the movie The Matrix, is false, and somehow there is an external reality, and there are different beings flying around, walking around, and talking. So in that sense, we always use the simpler thing. Okay. Um, okay. So this is called Occam's razor, and most scientists think that it's true. Why it's true is not really clear. Why does it work is not really clear. Maybe the universe really is a very complicated thing. Maybe you are a brain in the vat. Okay. Um, but it is used. Go.
So the philosopher Hilary Putnam has a similar argument. It's called the no miracle hypothesis. That if you observe an event and you can explain it by two different explanations, then the explanation which sounds less miraculous, like the brain in a vat sounds more miraculous than the usual argument that we are bodies in which there is a head which gives rise to a mind. So he has this no miracle hypothesis to resolve this problem.
And of course, this all goes back, like all great thoughts, this goes back to David
Aristotle.
Hume on miracles. Do you know this?
Yeah. His book that he didn't publish in his lifetime, he left it for after his death to be published.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, that's the most brilliant argument ever. But I don't think we should get into it. It's going to take us too
Ah,
far afield. But
yes,
that's a criteria not only to measure scientific things, but also religious myths and dogma and things like that. So, and by the way, that's going back again to the problem of induction. Yeah,
exactly.
I've never seen somebody rise from the dead before. Therefore, I don't think I should believe that someone rise from the dead. That's basically what he's saying.
Exactly. Sir, let me make another observation. Let's consider the Copernican argument. He from the geocentric model of the Earth of the universe, he gave a heliocentric. Instead of the Earth being at the center, the Sun was at the center. Now, this also ties back to your argument about Paul Dirac's statement that beauty should be preferred, but beauty is actually acquired. If you ask a man on the street who doesn't know about epicycles and all those things that you argued, that which is a simpler theory, the fact that the earth is stationary and the sun goes around the earth, or whether the earth is moving around the sun, just because some epicycle, I mean some figures would look better. So in that sense, that theory would be simpler. So it also ties to your argument now that the beauty of mathematics and physics is actually acquired taste. It's not something that is instilled into you from the beginning.
100%. And most people, I mean, if they didn't know anything about it, they would look up and they would say, "Look, the sun is moving. You see it right there. What are you talking about?"
So then that would be the simpler theory, na? If you use Occam's razor, that would be the simpler theory.
100%, 100%. But and let's go further. Copernicus wasn't accepted. Copernicus was not accepted during his time, and it's actually the most interesting thing. Copernicus did a very intelligent thing. He dedicated his book. First of all, he died right after it was published. So So no one argued with him because he was dead. You didn't have to argue with him. And the second thing was that it was so insane what he was saying that most people ignored it. In other words, he was saying things that were against what people saw, so most people ignored it. Third thing was that his predictions were wrong. Copernicus's predictions were wrong because he lived before Kepler, and he thought that the planets and the Earth go around the sun in circles because circles are prettier things than ellipses. He didn't even have the idea of ellipses. So his predictions of where the planets should be found were wrong. Okay, and another thing, reason why Copernicus was ignored or wasn't criticized was because he dedicated the book to the Pope, which is a very smart thing to do because then the Pope's going to like you. Okay, but a few decades later, when Galileo was around, he did things that weren't as smart as Copernicus. First of all, he lived long, and second of all, he wrote it in Italian rather than Latin, and so it became a popular thing. It wasn't something that can be ignored. In other words, you can ignore Copernicus, but you couldn't ignore Galileo because he wrote it in popular. And another thing that he did, and this is much more serious, was he took a new thing called a telescope and he looked at Jupiter, and he saw that the moons of Jupiter are going around Jupiter, and he said, hey, that's interesting. You have a giant thing and you have small things going around it. That's maybe like our planets. You have the giant sun and the planets are going around it. And so he was using induction, by the way, saying, hey, it happens here, it happens in Saturn. I don't know if he was able to see the moons of Saturn, but maybe it happens on, in the whole universe also. But that was a convincing argument. So, and also Galileo lived after Kepler, so he understood the notion of an ellipse rather than a circle, and so he was able to make better predictions about the positions of the planets. Okay, so what happened there was Galileo was so correct that he had to be condemned. So he was condemned. So that's just an interesting, two people saying the same thing, and one was ignored and the other one was accepted. But I'm sorry, I forgot your question. What were you talking about? This. So the point was that Galileo had so many proofs and fixed so many of the problems of Copernicus that it became simpler. Now that we saw it from a different point of view, it became simpler to see the universe in Galileo's point of view than in the man on the street's point of view. And so he had to talk about things. One of the things he was bothered was, how come we don't feel the earth moving? And so he talks about, well, if you're in a boat and the boat is moving and you have no windows, you won't feel it moving either. And when you're in a train and the train is going, well, he didn't have trains, but if you're in a train and the train is going smoothly, you won't feel it moving either. So that's an explanation of why we should ignore empirical evidence. Just because you don't see it moving and you don't feel it moving doesn't mean it's not moving.
2 points. One is, sir, Galileo wrote in Italian and his prose was also very good. It is readable. Yeah, this I have read these paragraphs that you have said about imagine yourself in a boat with all things down and you are going smoothly in the water. You won't feel anything going. These all things. And secondly, sir, the thing about the Jupiter was, now there could be empirical evidence. Aristotelian physics assumed that the heavens is fixed, it's unchanging. Now you could show them that there is Jupiter and around it there are moons, and any common man also could see through the telescopes if he wanted to. So there was also empirical observation also in support of the theory. And people can't understand the theory of Copernicus, but they can see through the telescope and see for themselves that there are things, moons around the Jupiter. So it also, the evidence accrued over all other things.
So this brings up something more in modern physics. So there's a theory of physics that things are made out of string theory. Okay, and the explanations is very mathematical, and seems very compelling, that that all the physics is just vibrating strings, and they're all of one type, and one type of thing, and stuff like that. The problem is there's no empirical evidence to show that string theory is true and other theories are not true. Okay, and so you're left with a question. Should you accept? It's not. We have no experiments to show that it's false, so it's not falsifiable. So do you accept the simpler thing? I would say string theory is in a sense simpler because there's only one type of particle. They're all vibrating different ways, but there's one type of particle, and it's all very mathematical and it explains everything. Or should you wait till there's some empirical evidence or it's falsifiable? Okay, and so this battle continues till today. It's not just Galileo 300 years ago, it's 400 years ago. It's happening now too.
Where are you on this battle?
So one of the things I do in my book is I present all different points of view. I would like string theory to be true, but I'm not passionate about it.
Okay.
I don't know how people are passionate about it, because how can you say it's not true? I mean, how could you say it's true and how could you say it's not true? What I think people should continue doing is working out all explanations of all it does. But what string theory does is it takes physics more into the mathematical realm. So we talked about this last time about Max Tegmark saying all of physics is mathematics. I'm not sure he's talking about string theory itself, but it's a very nice thing. So this is a pattern that's been going on for a long time. Physics getting more and more mathematical. Hold on one second. I have a book recommendation. This is a wonderful book. It's called The Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Science by E.A. Burt. Okay, and he says the scientific thinking of Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and their contemporaries. And the idea is he's showing how over time mathematics became more and more fundamental to physics, and how over time physics demanded more and more mathematics. And by the time it got to Newton, who's later than Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Galileo, Newton wouldn't accept it unless there was an equation. Okay, and we have that now also. You can't just say, well, smoking a cigarette and say, I have this theory and this and this. You have to have it equations. You have to have it more mathematical. Well, what string theory does is it takes it. Oh, and by the way, Einstein made it even further. He said all of gravity is just about shapes. This is shape of space-time. Okay, so which is again just geometry, which is a branch of mathematics. What string theory says is it goes further. It says all of physical things, not just relativity, but quantum theory is all about shapes, the shapes of the strings and the patterns of the strings vibrating. And so it takes it takes physics more and more deeper and deeper into the realm of just being mathematics. Okay, and so in that sense, I I like string theory because it's continuing a 300 or 400 year pattern of making physics more and more mathematical. However, just because that pattern has been going on for 400 years doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Back to induction. We've been coming back to induction over and over. Just because physics is becoming more and more and more mathematical doesn't mean that pattern will continue and all of physics will be just mathematical. Okay, it could be that there is a physical reasons for things, not mathematical reasons for things.
In some sense, you're saying it's a conservative argument that just because something has been going on, it is the pattern that would be followed.
I would like it because I'm more at home with shapes than physics, but that's not a reason to say it's true. That's
Again, it's not a logical reason.
It's not a logical reason to say it's true. I would love there to be empirical evidence, and I would love someone to come up with a falsifiable statement about string theory and whatever. But I have gone to conferences with people, and there were string theorists and non-string theorists. A conference run by Max Tegmark, whatever, and I found people were extremely passionate about it, saying this is true and that's not true, and what I do is important and what you do is not important and shouldn't be done. Okay, and I strongly disagree with that. I think that all types of physics and all types of mathematics, all types of physics should be done, and everything's important.
This is the argument advocated by Lee Smolin in his book, The Trouble with Physics. You see.
Right. So Lee Smolin does not believe in string theory, or I don't know if he doesn't believe it, just doesn't. He has his loop quantum gravity, which is very good, whatever. And what happened over the past 30 years was that string theory took over the physics world, and he's lamenting that fact. He's complaining about that fact and says, you know what, it could be that it's not true. And he's right. It has to be everything. Both schools of thought have to be accepted.
So we can stop it here if you like.
I think that's enough. We've gone to the deepest of the deepest issues.
Yeah. I should stop the recording.
Okay.